Jammin'. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Castline Ministries podcast. And I don't have the weeks on these sheets, but I think this is week 6. We'll go with week 6.
What's
You
that?
guys know because it's right there on the title. We are talking about Judah this week. Less of a known character, other than, most people are familiar with the tribe of Judah. When you think about Old Testament people, you're not going, oh yeah, Judah. Not a whole lot of chapter time devoted to him. He does get his one separate chapter all devoted to him, and it's not pretty. But we'll dive into that. And we also tied into this week's reading. You'll notice there's a lot about Joseph as well, because you kind of have to have his story and to understand what's going on with Judah. And we'll get into that as well. And so we were kind of talking a little bit beforehand, but why don't you guys share what was your overall impressions this week's reading on Judah? And we'll kind of start from there and dive into his story.
I mean, I'd say there's not a lot. I think while reading, I had to focus that we were reading about Judah and not Joseph. Because I'm like, oh yeah, I know this story. And then it's like, oh, then you hear Judah, you're like, oh right, Judah, Judah. Okay,
Yep.
listen for just kind of what it was talking about for him. But
I feel like Judah at the beginning of the stories has a lot of bad qualities that are up front that he makes up for later. I don't know if the story was written chronologically. I'm assuming that in the time span between Joseph and like being sold and then the Egypt thing, the bulk of Judah's story happened, or whatever's in the
I
Bible.
think it's pretty chronological as far as I
Okay.
can tell. Yeah.
So he definitely made up for his weaknesses. Um, so I guess at the end of the
That has
day,
been my read of his story. So under the title, sometimes I write like a short synopsis of like what each person is. So under Judah, I wrote a story of redemption. And I think if you go into it with that theme, then you understand he's going to be kind of crummy,
mhm.
but by the end you go, okay. And I have a way of reading his story that helps kind of turn it into a lesson that we can apply. So we'll get into that. Yes, Judah is going to, this will probably be a shorter week just because there's not as much content, but this kind of ends we've been hitting quite a few generationally. So starting with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Judah. And kind of like what Asha said, you want to gravitate more towards the Joseph storyline. Because in like Genesis, Joseph's like the one guy that's like just pretty good all around. Kind of as a teenager, kind of like, look at my cool dreams.
Mhm.
And you don't really want to root for him, but
Mhm.
later on, Joseph's like a pretty great guy. And he's exemplifies a lot of so when you get into typology, Joseph is a great type of Christ um, in the way that his life plays out. Judah, that's another hand. So why don't we start off with
Panel.
Kennel. That's a good spot.
no,
Oh
lay down,
no.
lay down.
Sorry. Oh man.
This dog just
Embarrassed.
All right. So we talked a bit about this last week, but Judah is, do you got it laid out in your mind where he is in the birth order and under which mom? So remember, Jacob's married to 4 different women, or married to 2 and then I don't know how it plays out.
He's he's older than Joseph, is he not?
yes, Joseph is the second young. Well, actually, I don't know that one. It's the second youngest. Um, I think Judah's fourth. I don't know who his mom is. I want to say it's Leah
Uh-huh.
because she had like the first couple.
Yep. So I want to say that he was third. That was what was in my head. Because you have,
Reuben, Simeon, Levi,
Judah.
oh, yep,
Judah.
fourth. There you go. So that's a good thing to keep in mind because typically, if you're like, okay, this thing's being passed on, who's going to be the leader, the ruler, firstborn? You would think, um, I just said his name,
Reuben.
Reuben, Reuben Sandwich. You would think Reuben would be first. But as we come to read in the story, he's not the right person for the job, and we'll talk about that. So he's only the fourth. He's in the line of Leah, so not the loved wife. And yet Judah will end up basically most of the other tribes are going to just kind of get carried off into exile, die away. Maybe there's some arguments for some still being around, but Judah's predominantly what's left of the Israelite people. And it's where
It
all the
kind
kings of Judah come from.
it kind of goes into that whole thing of like Rebecca was the one that Israel chose, but then Leah was the
Rachel.
second, but what? Oh yeah. Rebecca,
Rachel.
Rachel. Oh God. Um, so the second, the lesser one is the one that Jesus came out of.
Mm-hmm.
Like that plays out there too.
Huge theme in all these things we've
Yeah.
been reading about. The lesser is the way that God chooses, not by what man chooses or who culture would choose. So again, that carries this theme. And we've had this conversation, like the themes carry throughout. And what I love about when you are doing Bible studies like this is either in church or something else that you're listening to, you go, oh, this is things start connecting. So one of Bible Project's most recent videos, they're kind of going through the Exodus story, which I think that's what your guys' church is doing. So they're doing how Exodus is already being teased in the Genesis story, talking about Abraham, and also carrying that story back to Adam and Eve, and there's all these correlations. And so it's very cool that like that episode played. I'm like, I'm just doing that same study here and how all the things connect. So it's very cool. When you get in the Bible, more of the Bible jumps out at you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's get into the first kind of main interaction with Judah and the brothers. Joseph is heading out to see them. How does Judah carry himself when they all start their plotting and planning? I gotta
I think for one thing,
refresh.
he definitely is part of the plotting and planning. I think let's see where it said it. This is
It was 37.
37.
No. That was James. I lied.
I want to say that he was it Reuben? Reuben said not to kill him,
Yep. So Reuben
and
convinced them just
then
to throw him in a pit.
yeah, and then Judah, his idea was to sell him. In my head, I thought it was the same person,
Hmm.
who
That's why
did
I had to.
both.
That's why I had to double check. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess in order of like who's the worst brother, the
Yeah.
best of the brothers, or the second best, because Benjamin is probably the best one.
Yeah.
Then Reuben and then Judah. So
Yep.
like,
He at least talks them out of killing them, but yeah, does end up selling them off into slavery and sells them to the Ishmaelites.
hmm,
And I think I brought this up in an earlier conversation. The Ishmaelites, descendants of Abraham's other son,
yeah, Ishmael.
Ishmael. So these are distant cousins of theirs. So interesting story there, being sold off to them. And how much was he sold for? 20. I think I made a note that there is sort of a similar idea of selling Joseph off pieces of
Like,
silver. It wasn't the exact
Mm-hmm.
amount. I think it was 20
yeah,
shekels. But kind of that same idea, Jesus being sold off by one of his brothers. And so you can kind of see Judah
Exodus.
being sort of a Judas in this moment,
Yeah.
which Judas is just a play off of Judah. So,
Hmm.
um,
It's like Jude, Judas, and Judah are all the same name,
yep,
right? Yeah.
yep. So there's that sort of connection going on, kind of betraying his brother. And when you look at Joseph as sort of a Christ type, that even plays in more. So that all happens. They trick their
One,
dad
20
and
shekels of silver.
20
I found
shekels. So I think it's, once inflation is counted into effect,
it.
yeah, then it's equal. Okay, so that's the easy part of the story. Now we have to dive into Judah and Tamar, which is the fun
No,
part of
it's
the
your
Bible.
section. You can talk about that one.
So just for those listening, although I know everybody listening is already reading your Bible and doing the study, but I'll just do a quick recap. Judah goes off, takes his flock of sheep and his wife, and they're off living elsewhere among the Canaanites. And they have three sons, and they marry off the oldest son to a woman named Tamar. And the oldest son, it just says that God saw him as doing evil, and so
Mhm.
God took his life. And so the culture and actually what becomes sort of a law later on was okay, you had like an agreement between Tamar's family and this family. You don't want that agreement to fall through, so the next brother of kin marries that other person to keep that contract alive because they need to have an offspring, essentially. And it's a and if you don't understand what this is all about, you could be like, why is this guy throwing such a big fuss? But essentially, he's going to give birth to a son. The son inherits everything under the older brother's name. This guy doesn't get a part of it. So you are when you what's the term for this? Well, it's a good time to. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Levirate marriage. Found it.
Not have gotten
So
that
this
off
is the
my head.
process of levirate marriage, where the next of kin, and this will play out in another story we'll read about in Ruth. Levirate marriage is a big part of that story, so that's why I'm pointing it out. Um, but the younger son is being selfish and is like, well, I'm not going to give them a seed for something I'm not even going to get. It's not going to benefit me. So he does some shady stuff, and God's like, that's evil, and he dies.
Hmm.
And then they're like, well, partly because we don't want to lose another son, and partly because he's young. Why don't you go back and live with your family, and we'll do this marriage thing later? Not really planning to continue the marriage. So this all comes to a head when she finds out they're still not giving me the marriage to him, even though he's grown up. So she tricks Judah, dresses up as a prostitute, sleeps with him, gets pregnant, and then it becomes this whole ordeal where he's like, she's pregnant, stone her. And she's like, but the person who got me pregnant owned these. And then he's like,
Guys
you
had a
got
change of
me.
heart.
She doesn't need to be
Guys, I
stoned.
think we should let her be. She's okay.
I'm pretty progressive. I think this is okay. Um,
Let he who sinned cast the first stone, guys. Come
yeah.
on.
So change of heart. Um, so very weird, but you got to think about Tamar's position. She didn't do a good thing. There's the phrase like she did better than I did. That doesn't mean she did a good thing. It just means
Mhm.
Judah was crappy. But if you think of from her perspective of she's never going to get married off to anybody, this other
Mhm.
family is taking away her chance of any sort of survival. Other than that, she's going to live and leech off her family's household, her dad's household. So, she kind of saw what she needed to do and did it. Not that it was good.
Mhm.
Um, so that's what happens there. He doesn't marry her. They don't have any more further relations, but now they have kids coming into the world together. So that's a mess. And there is a little interesting story about the two little boys. Remember their names?
Uh, no.
It just starts in verse
Um,
27.
I was wondering if they do come up later in some
no,
way.
A
they
little
say
bit.
Okay. Not Sheila.
um
Z
there's Perez
Zara.
and Zara.
Perez and Zara. Zara, according to this story, and I've seen my wife give birth twice, so I don't know how this is possible, but Zara sticks his hand out and they tie a cord around it. His hand goes back in. Perez is born, and then Zara is born. That's the story that gets told.
Hmm.
And I feel like there's
Hard labor.
something to that.
It's,
That is a hard labor.
it said mentioned something about what a breach you have made for yourself.
Yeah.
I don't know if that means anything about the birth. I know breaching
Yeah.
is.
Could just be translation. I feel like, and this might be something fun to dig into, because there's like the scarlet thread. Does the scarlet thread mean something?
Mm.
Um, like I'm just interested in the story, and I think there's something to it, but I haven't had time to look into it. But now, so here's the argument. So, who's the firstborn in that situation?
Zara.
If you go
Oh,
with Zara, then
Perez.
Perez would be the secondborn. Perez will end up being the lineage that we will follow. So,
Mm.
kind of interesting.
So
Mhm.
per, you're saying Perez was theoretically the second born?
Yeah,
Okay.
if you
The
count
first to
Zara
the
sticking his
last.
hand out.
But
So,
then would Zira be technically like born twice or born again?
who knows? That's why I want to
Let's
dig
make it
more into
more
that story.
complicated.
I just want to point out Perez, even though there's not a lot about him, is the lineage that we'll follow. Um, there is one more comment about Perez, and it's actually, we'll get to it again when we're in Ruth, but right at the end of Ruth, I'm sure we can find it real quick. After Deuteronomy, after
Perez means a
Joshua,
breach.
Yeah,
Ruth.
that's what it says.
Oh yeah.
That's a horrible name. My name means a breach.
Unless you go into the military.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the same kind of breach.
Let's see here. So at the end of Ruth, they're all celebrating because Boaz and Ruth gave birth to a son. May your house become like the house of Perez, the son of Tamar, bore to Judah.
Hmm.
So the people celebrating around Ruth and Boaz when they have their kid, they say, "We hope you are like the house of Perez." So we don't know much about Perez, but it was enough that these people, multiple generations now living in the promised land, called back to him as something to aspire to. So kind of cool that out of this whole weird ordeal, apparently Perez comes out as a pretty stand-up guy, something to
Hmm.
be looked up to. Cool. Any other thoughts on that story before we get back to more of Judah and Joseph? And I've got one thought. Share.
Mm, no, I
D-
think they're all. Go ahead and go.
Oh, I was just gonna say, kind of just that's really where you see the weaknesses in Judah's character is like his craftiness in a bad way. Yeah, just trying to like, I don't know if he just put it out of his mind or was intentionally not like giving his son to her.
Hmm.
Um, but like after the Joseph thing, and I don't know, maybe he learned his lesson from this.
This is the definition of hitting rock bottom, would be
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Hmm.
So we can expect to see better things from him moving forward. So this kind of fell under my personal application when I first kind of began reading the story. This is how I read this. So the story, this whole event, it starts off with Judah moving away from his father's household to Canaan. So, and the way I kind of interpret that is he's leaving not only his family, but the family god. So he's like leaving God and living with the world. You even see this with he's going with his buddy to this town, and he goes like he's living a life with people who are like, go for it, dude, sleep like he's not living around the right people.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's sort of the personal application about why you can't just leave family and friends. You gotta be careful who you are around, um, because that's kind of what the world is. Um, but with that being said, no matter what our past is, we can all be redeemed, which we're about to dig into. So I think that's what I had. All right, now that we're caught up, and for the rest of the story, it seems like Judah's around his family again. So like it seemed like
Mhm.
he did come back to the
Or
household,
like, or the famine brought him back.
or the famine brought him back, or something like that.
Like if you
So,
get to the low spot and then something like that happens, and
yep.
yeah.
All right. Do we need to cover any of Joseph's story to get caught up, or we assume everyone's watched Prince of Egypt? That's Moses.
Pause the episode right now.
Wrong story.
And didn't DreamWorks make a Joseph movie?
Maybe
Yeah,
they did do a Joseph.
they did do it,
I
Joseph.
Okay,
didn't I didn't reference the right one.
pause the movie right now. Go set up your Disney Plus account. I'm not condoning it. Do a
Use
free
your free
trial.
trial
Do a free trial. Watch the movie.
and
Cancel
then
it
come back.
immediately and come back.
There we go.
Or pirate
Or
the
rent it
movie.
on
Or
Amazon.
Oh,
pirate.
that too.
Go through another bad company.
Steal from the bad companies. Don't do that.
Okay, so to get us caught up, Joseph is spending his time in Egypt. He's getting blessed, and then he gets thrown in prison, but he gets called out of that. Now he's basically the ruler of Egypt, which is cool. He interprets a dream. We're going to have some year of plenty and then years of famine. So he's got Egypt set up as a hub. This is where our story kind of picks up. If you want food, you go to Egypt. And so we get this story now where the brothers are going to travel to Egypt, all except Benjamin, interact with Joseph, asking for food. They don't know it's him, he knows it's them, and all this stuff sort of happens. And one thing I'll point out is a lot of the who they say does the talking, or you'll often see the phrase like Judah and his brothers. Like Judah kind of becomes the main character for the group.
Hmm.
And so you that's kind of a clue in like it was kind of random that you had this one story about Judah, but like Judah's kind of like the main person in this group of brothers. Um, and so they do some of this negotiation. Joseph is essentially you can kind of see what he's doing is testing them the same way that they gave him up to see if they'll give up Benjamin again or give up another brother again. He's kind of testing them in that way to kind of see are they the same. Um, so that's what all these tests are about. So we talked about redemption in this story. Connor, where does his redemption come in? Where did you see it?
I saw it in the second time they came back, but I'm guessing that I'm looking at a quick scan to see if I see Judah.
Well, when they went to see the father.
I know. Um, I don't see his name in when they returned to his father, when they returned to Israel. Um, but when I saw it, it was when they came back from for a second time. Um, I think to get Simeon and to get more food, and with Benjamin, um, Judah kind of led the charge there. He told his father to give him Benjamin to take with him, and then um, kind of acted as the parental figure, if not like guardian for Benjamin.
Mhm.
And then when they got caught, or when Joseph set them up to get them back, he I put this down as a foreshadowing of Jesus. He took Benjamin's place as like he tried to at least. He was like,
Right.
take me instead of the boy, which kind of made me think of like Jesus and his sacrifice.
Now, he wasn't the first person to try to persuade their dad to release Benjamin. He was actually
Yeah.
the second person. Reuben tries it first.
Yeah.
Verse 37 in chapter 42, it says, Then Reuben said to his father, You can kill my two sons if I don't bring him back to you.
Oh,
Oh, so there's Reuben. Hey, if I don't bring him back, you can kill my sons. It's like, oh, how noble of you. So that's like
so would
Reuben.
it be the two new ones that came?
No, this isn't Perez. It's Reuben's kids.
Oh,
Yep.
my bad. Yeah,
So
I got you.
Reuben goes first, and he goes, "Hey, you can have kill my sons if Benjamin doesn't come back." And he goes, "No." And then so like you're looking at that like Reuben, what are you offering your kids up for?
Mhm.
Judah comes back and is like, "You can have my life." And like you said, this is total foreshadowing.
Yeah.
I will give up my life for the sins of whatever.
Hmm.
Um,
Take
should
my
he not come
sons.
back?
Mhm.
I'm
And
glad
that's
people don't
the
like I mean, at least our dad doesn't. I was gonna say people don't talk like that. There might be some, but our dad doesn't do that.
which two sons would he give up?
Take my youngest. He's expendable. I got three others. The youngest one. Never mind. I'm gonna stop.
And none of them became doctors. Ugh.
No. Asha was the first.
I was the first
Yeah,
for a short time,
for a short time.
short-lived.
All right. So I think that's the peak where you really see his redemption, but you also see it when he goes back and he pleads with Joseph. You can kind
Mhm.
of see Joseph's really testing to see if they're going to betray, and sure enough, he doesn't. So you see that full redemption. So very cool. Um, so that is it. The one other thing that we can highlight, and I think we talked about this last time, was the prophecy that Jacob, so he gives his blessing to everybody. And if you look at this is chapter 49, verses 8 through 12, the blessing is to Judah is like a prophecy as well. And we looked at that last
Yep.
week.
Mhm.
I wrote that down.
Yep. So Judah now becomes this line that is promised that the future leaders and kings will come from.
Yep.
And that is true enough. When Israel chooses their own leader, they pick somebody from the tribe of Benjamin, um, Saul, based off his outward appearance. When God chooses, he chooses from Judah, off the inward, King David.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean all of the kings were great. In fact, we're going to get to all of the kings at the end of this, and you got a lot of them to go through. And so I just did, as I read through each one, I gave them a grade. It was like, you get an A, you get an A, C minus, F.
Yeah.
So cool. Any other thoughts that you guys have on Judah?
I don't know. So Revelations 5:5, we read
Yes.
that verse. Would Is that also a foreshadowing of Jesus, or is that what does it say?
Getting there. Oop, go far.
Rev.
Wow.
Then I saw the right hand of the one seated on the throne. I'm backing up a bit.
Okay.
Of the throne scroll, writing on both sides, sealed with seven seals. I also saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals? But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or even look in it. I wept and wept because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or even to look in it. Then one of the elders said to me, Do not weep. Look, The lion from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered, so that he is able to open the scroll and its seven seals. So I would say, yes, this is. Oh, my camera is. There we go. Hi, everybody. This is saying that when we get to the end times,
Mhm.
whatever that looks like, because no one's got the right eschatology, or someone does, and we don't know who. That whatever this revealing is, it seems like Jesus, who would be in the line of Judah. The root of David is another thing that will come up later in our readings. Um, that's Jesus. And then that's confirmed in verse 6. Then I saw one like a slaughtered lamb standing in the midst of the throne and the four living creatures. He had seven horns and seven eyes, which are the Spirit of God sent into all earth. He went and took the scroll of the right hand of the one seated on the throne. And it keeps going on. Some songs are sung, but yeah. Revelations is
People
a whole can
understand
of
this stuff.
worms.
Mhm.
Some people know like how to
So
get us
if you
out of
stick
that.
around with my stuff, we'll eventually get to Revelations. And like I said, we'll get to it in the end. So, but I think to understand Revelations, you got to understand a lot more of the Bible.
Yeah.
So I think the next big one I want to tackle is Hebrews. And
Back after this.
it's on my to-do list to start.
Mm.
But I probably won't be done for a long time because now that Bible Thinker is doing a Hebrew series, I'm kind of like tied to. So
Yeah.
he just finished getting through chapter one. So
Mhm.
now I can look at his notes. What are the key references he's making back so I can create something good? But he's not going to be done with Hebrews for a long time. So I won't
Yeah.
be done for a long time.
Mhm.
So we just went through Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah. And that took you through pretty much a lot of the book of Genesis. What was your guys' thoughts of going through Genesis, looking at these different people?
They all need Jesus.
Mhm.
Henceforth, the foreshadowing of why he's coming because they
Yeah.
need him.
Because they are just like us, or
Yeah.
we're just like them.
I found every time I've judged the people in the Bible, God puts it like my story next to him.
Mhm.
Like a good example was why couldn't the Israelites wait 40 days for Moses to come back? And God goes, hey, remember that thing I asked you to like fast from? You couldn't even make it 30 days. And I was like, oh. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like the Israelites, they were better than me.
Yep.
So
It's a good attitude to have going to the Old Testament. Because I remember
Mhm.
growing up as a kid, I was just always like, we learned about, like, you guys are idiots again.
Mhm.
But yeah, when you grow up, you're like, oh, yeah, humans and myself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. If I've got the time and motivation, which I think I do, I will try to create a in-between video for this one to bridge us from Judah to where we'll go next, because we actually jump past quite a few books and we go to Ruth. But there are like little nuggets of different people, so I can kind of carry us through the Exodus story. Who's our people that's carrying this line? And then when we get to Ruth, that's where it picks up. And then at the end of Ruth, it's actually like, and Ruth, blah, 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 King David. So it has like a nice streamlined genealogy going for us. I think that's it. I think that's it. I hope you guys are
All
having
right.
fun.
I got one last thing for you.
Go.
Um, this I caught this at the very well in the midst of the Joseph story,
Mhm.
and he's kind of messing around with his brothers. I think it was after the first time he sent them out. He told them on the way back to their father, "Don't quarrel on the way." Just don't. He knows them. It's like go back to
Don't
your father
quarrel.
and don't quarrel on the way.
Don't fight. Just look at the mountains and stop arguing.
I was like, oh, he was hiding in little tidbits that he knew who they were.
Yeah.
So funny. I just had to mention that one.
Alrighty. Thank you all. We'll see you guys next week. And have a good one. Bye.